Well, if I get to be budget chairman, we're going to have a serious discussion about how to save America from oblivion. We're going to talk about don't pay people more not to work than to work because they'll take you up on it.
Right. Right.
We're going to talk about subsidies for Obamacare. And this new package that Joe mentioned is on again, off again, is going to price fix prescription drugs. The pharmaceutical industry under President Trump developed vaccines in record time. Now, we're still getting infected, but the death rate is way down. I think one of the biggest accomplishments of the Trump administration was to break the back of the bureaucracy and let the private sector develop drugs that kept a lot of people alive. Well, if you price fix, you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So, but there's subsidies in this new package, too. Under Build Back Better, they created a subsidy for people on Obamacare up to $100,000. That is ridiculous. Now, they extend it for 2 years, but how many of you think they just want it for 2 years? If you extended the cost of the subsidy out for 10 years, it adds $260 billion to the deficit. So this new approach is a friggin' lie. It does add to the deficit. Now, do you agree the Republican Party has got its... that we're not pure on spending? We need to get back to the party that says that you got to live within your means. You got to have a budget hearing about what you can afford and what you can't. What's the most important? To me, it's national security. If Putin gets away with destroying the Ukraine, that's the 4th and 5th largest producer of grain and corn in the world. He'd have a monopoly. If Taiwan goes to China, 90% of the high-end chips are made in Taiwan. You'll give 2 dictatorships economic control of the world. So the bottom line here is that Donald Trump took a broken military and he rebuilt it. He took a country that was dependent on foreign oil and made us energy independent. He took a border that was broken and it made it the most secure in the history of our country. He made Mexico afraid of us. He made China afraid of us. Why did Mexico help us and remain in Mexico policy? Because after Trump whacked China with my friend here, Mr. Lighthizer, the Mexicans believed if he'll do that to China, what the hell would he do to me? You know what's missing in the world? Not a damn person in the world is afraid of America. We need to instill fear in the bad guys and hope in the good guys.
Thank you. That's great. Terrific. Can I ask House people, start with Steve, the controversy right now on spending is this $250 billion bill to help the semiconductor industry. I myself have grave doubts about it. But, I mean, if the GOP is the party to limit, freeze, or cut spending, here we go, $250 billion. It's essentially a Democratic bill, but it got 16 votes, Republican votes in the Senate. I reckon it's going to pass. Will it go through the House? Should it go through the House?
I wish it wouldn't, and if you think about it, maybe 20% of that bill at most even deals with chip manufacturing in America, which we ought to be bringing back anyway. 80%, and the bill keeps growing. I mean, every week that goes by, a bill that started as a $50 billion bill, mostly paid for, became a $200+ billion bill, completely unpaid for. That's moving right now through the United States Senate. Could pass as early as this week. These are all the things that we ought to be very concerned about. These are the bills we need to be stopping. And look, what Biden did the day he came in started it used to be hundreds of billions. Remember when Obama was president? You know, they did cap and trade to try to wreck the energy economy. Then they did Obamacare to wreck our health care economy and go to single payer. Then they did the stimulus bill, which was $700 billion, which back then was way too much. Today it's still way too much, but now it's trillions, not billions, that they're dealing with. And you wonder why inflation's out of control. You wonder why gas prices are high. You wonder why the border's not secure. And you wonder why a terrorist organization now controls Afghanistan after all the brilliant advisors in the Biden administration said it wouldn't happen. And they were wrong on everything else, too.
Thank you for that. Jason, just to I don't want to obsess about this, but it is an important piece of legislation. Wouldn't it be better, instead of picking winners and losers here, to just extend the 100% expensing provision for plants and equipment and machinery? This would help the chip industry, but it also would help every other industry. My concern, and you know, We had this discussion in the White House towards the end, and President Trump never really wanted this kind of assistance. He didn't like putting money for, picking winners. He would say, all right, you want subsidized chips, well, why don't we subsidize farmers? Why don't we subsidize steel? They're all important. They're all important. I mean, we have to have a strong defense. We're going to need steel. We're going to need aluminum. We're going to need a lot. We're going to need oil and gas. So why not extend the expensing provision? Why not make the research and development tax credit? You could expense that 100%, by the way. Kevin Brady's stuff coming out of Ways and Means just shows how much less that would cost. You follow? And then we'd help all of industry, and we'd develop more onshoring incentives, et cetera, et cetera. It'd be a whole lot cheaper.
Yeah. First off, in regards to the CHIPS bill, a huge concern, we talk about mandatory spending.
Mm-hmm.
This adds billions of dollars of more mandatory spending that takes away discretionary spending from Congress.
I didn't know this about the mandatory side.
It does. And so there is a better way to have a better CHIPS bill without the mandatory spending. But when you're talking about the tax policy, that's what's on the ballot in November. That's why this election's so important, because our policies, our ways, is to make expensing 100% permanent, or at least extend it, because it's starting to phase out this year. 199A, which is the 20% deduction for small businesses, which make up more than 80 to 90% of all the businesses, that expires in 2025. R&D tax credit, it's expired right now, which Senator Young tried very aggressively to get it on the CHIPS bill over in the Senate side.
I didn't know that.
These are things that have to be done, and that's what will turn the economy around.
Bob Lighthizer, I know you like the concept of the bill, but I'm not sure you really like the bill, do you?
Well,
you can tell me confidentially. No one is going to
for me to have a view different than everyone else in a room. So that's been the story of my life. but so let me go back to basics. We're in this existential battle with China. I mean, literally, whether or not our children are going to have prosperity. The battleground for that war is technology and chips. That's who's going to win and who's going to lose. Right now, the United States makes 13% of their chips and 0% of any of the high-tech chips, any of the high-end logic chips. Zero. You fly that F-35, it doesn't have American chips in it. Just think about this, those tanks that we're driving. And in terms of picking winners and losers, look at every industry you name stops without chips. Do you think you can make automobiles? We all know that. Christ, most of us ordered cars 2 or 3 years ago and we haven't got it. You can't make cars. You can't make steel. You can't make pharmaceuticals. You can't make machinery. You can't do high-tech processing. You can't do any of these without chips. We invented this bloody area and we're completely pushed out of it. Now, why? Because everyone else is subsidizing it. So in the last few months, since some people have made their decision on where they were, the following people have announced they're going to subsidize, bigger than us, by the way, Europe, Japan, Korea, China, more than $1 trillion. If you're in a knife fight for your life, you don't use the Marquis of Queensberry rule book. You go out there and you do what you have to do to win. Now, is this good? I'm sure it's poorly drafted. I told Larry yesterday on television the sainted Reagan economic package, which he worked on in the White House and I worked on the Hill, had flaws, right? It was a compromise. You come along the next day and we are in, and you fix it. And we're in the position where we're going to have Republicans be able to come along and fix this thing. But the notion that you're going to send a signal to the world that we're not going to compete with all the other economies that matter on the most important playing ground is, to me, insanity. And some level of inefficiency exists in everything that comes out of Congress. Just fix it.
You know, I would, because I agree with the principles that you espouse, I would suggest there's better, more efficient ways to do it than outspending China. I mean, we went through the Japanese thing back in those economies that spend and spend and spend and subsidize do very poorly in the long run. those economies that are free and open incentive do very well in the long run. We're not going to settle this here. I know it's a controversial issue, but I would say to you, Lindsey, because you're pivotal in this, if it's possible to help the chip industry, because it is a matter of national security. I agree with you. I agree with Bob Lighthizer. But is it possible? I mean, look, there's a $50 billion subsidy for the Energy Department. I mean, you can't convince me that that has anything to do with chips. It's cylindric to the 10th or 20th power. That's the stuff that bothers us. The Commerce Department has a slush fund in this bill. That's the stuff that bothers us. In other words, what Tom Cotton said to me on TV the other night, he said, yes, the Democrats are scratching every itch in this bill. And I just think we have to put up a better messaging to get it through. I'll give you the last word. We're out of time.
Well, number one, this is what happens when they're in charge and we're not. If Steve was in charge, we'd have a better bill because we'd have better negotiating. I know I'm like a broken record here. What Bob said about China, do you understand how exposed we are as a nation? There are 40,000 chips in an electric car, and whether you like it or not, every car manufacturer in the world is moving toward electric vehicles. What does that mean? That means batteries become more important, right? Well, where's all the stuff to make a battery at? China. So what I want President Trump to do is to talk about the complex nature of the world in a simple way. If you give me another chance at this thing, I'm going to turn the board around in weeks, not years. Right? Every cop going to work will feel better when I'm president. The Chinese are going to be, we're going to take a gun to a knife fight when it comes to China. And we'd like to be their friend, but it's up to them. So the CHIPS bill is a result of where we are as a nation. The $50 billion package was absolutely necessary to get onshoring. 90% of the high-end chips in the entire world are made where? Taiwan. If you get Ukraine wrong, there goes Taiwan. The bottom line is, do you want Communist China to have the complete monopoly on the one thing everybody needs, from making a refrigerator to anything? So this is the world in which we live in. So I'm going to try to get as much back into America as I can, and I will not have clean hands in the process. Our national security depends on having a supply chain on the medical side where we don't depend on the Communist Chinese when we get sick, to make our own masks, make our own gowns, and to make our own chips. Now, this lady here is a great conservative from an energy-rich state. So we have a chance to be energy independent again, and all we have to do is use what God gave us. Right? We can help the Europeans.